some things do tie.
And one thing to note too is as far as those that are involved in commingle, that's basically unchanged with this price change. The rate relationships were maintained from the current prices to the new ones, so it's neutral.
Any questions on the letter side as we're going through this? You want to talk about a little bit on the nonprofit range?
Yeah, are we ready to move on to nonprofit? So again, the low end of the range is going to be the heavy high density saturation at an SCF. High density had a 0% increase for nonprofits. On the high end is if you had all 5-digit not getting drop shipped is where you're going to see spiking out at the top. Also on the higher end is all non-auto carrier route, and auto carrier route had a 15% increase. So.
Okay, now we get to the fun ones where we break down the marketing mail flats. Here's where we get into that 6.5% on marketing mail, but then we had the underwater non-compensatory product. The marketing mail flats, regular piece rates of the 4 ounces and under, you were looking at about 873 now on average when we run across there. But again, we're seeing a wide variety, 5 to 14% in terms of the range there. Again, same principle as the periodicals, co-mails get you more stabilized. It not only brings it down, but it's much more consistent in terms of what that impact is going to be. So you want to just talk through each one before we?
Sure, yeah. So for the marketing mail flats per piece, the piece regular, on the low end is non-auto 5-digit and 3-digit entered at an SCF. On the high end is all high density, no drop ship. Average co-mail participants should see around 8.2%. Co-mail value has improved, around 10% gross savings. 5-digit to basic carrier route gap rose 4 3/4%. 5-digit to a 5-digit carrier route pallet rose a little over 9%, and then basic carrier route to high density rose 13%. And then finally, carrier route 5-digit pallets to high density rose 20%. So next, if we do piece pound, again, the range there is fairly wide, but low end is all saturation at an SCF again, and on the high end is heavy high density going into an NDC. And then co-mail participants should see around 7%, and co-mail value overall should see an increase around 8% in gross savings. And you want me to walk through all the percentages and the gaps? I don't know if anyone, is that too many numbers?
I think the number they want is really that first number.
Yes.
And to be honest with you, when we say average, these ranges are outliers. You can tell these are not a normal mailing. I will say most of the mailing is right around where that average is coming in. So from a budgetary standpoint, those are really good numbers to use. And then we'll talk about what options you have if you have one of these high density saturations that's going into SCF or those types of things, and how we can actually do analysis that way. So let's move on to the nonprofits.
All right, for nonprofit piece, on the low end is all saturation at an SCF. On the high end is heavy 5-digit and 3-digit entering at an NDC. Again, average co-mail participants are going to see around 12.3%. The gross savings has improved on average of by 25%. And then, gotta flip my page here. For piece pound nonprofit, low end is again heavy saturation entering at an SCF. On the high end, again, is similar, heavy 5-digit and 3-digit going into an NDC. Overall, improvement in gross savings is around 15%. One of the things that is interesting about nonprofit piece pound, when you're looking at the piece part of it, the gap between 5-digit and carrier route has always been negative. And so that gap was less negative, so it's actually an improvement. But it's interesting that it's been that way for a long time.
Yeah, but overall, when you look, again, when we look at it from a marketing mail standpoint, the average there, letters, 6.5 by the postal standards, figure in that 6.7 range from a budgetary standpoint. The one nonprofit category that's lower is obviously the letters there at the 4.22. If you're a cataloger, if you're under the piece rate, then obviously you're looking at close to 9%, 8.73, and then closer to 7 if you're a piece pound. I mean, those are those levels really that you need from a budgetary standpoint. And like I say, it is pretty consistent even though we're showing ranges. Those are the anomaly ones that are sticking out. So.
Yeah, the high ends and low ends that you see are if you said all your mail was in a single rate category at that price point.
Yeah. Okay. Bound for the matter. I'm going to stand over here because Kristen's not going to like these numbers. On the bound per the matter side, the package services, the 8.5 in terms of the overall. The bound per the matter flats, Sharon already hit on this. The flats actually have a lower, so we're seeing about the 4.75, 5% area. But the parcel side, pretty dramatic increase in terms of the 10.42. We do have some anomaly coming in. Actually, I don't think it's showing up as red as it is, but we have a negative or a decrease on one mailing. So we can talk about that, but there is a big difference between the flats and the parcels on this one.
Yeah, so on flats, on the low end of the range is going to be carrier route entered at a DDU, and on the high end is carrier route entered at an NDC. For the parcels, the thing that was really interesting about that is essentially the Postal Service unzoned parcels this time, as Sharon's nodding. So what the net result is they picked a single number for all the zones. And so what happens here is that if you are using the Postal Service network and going to the higher zones, zone 7, 8, you're going to see a big drop. If you are actually using it and entering very close, and using zones 1 and 2, you're going to see a very large increase. So and if you're roughly around zone 4 or 5, you're going to be roughly the same as what you were getting before. And so you've got some big winners and some big losers, but it's interesting that the winners here are the ones that are flowing through the network. So I don't know, Sharon, if you want to speak to that.
Lower cost, but as I'd mentioned before, as we start changing or thinking about how we zone on our package side, taking the market dominant side out of the mix so they're not impacted by zone changes, will have a one-time effect of, and unzoning just means that it's just an average of, we're taking out distance in the pricing. It's just a function of unzoning. It was a strategic decision to make all of our market dominant products unzoned, flat rated by distance.
Is that difference enough to induce mailers to enter their product more distantly?
It's a conversation for people in the audience.
So it will take longer time in transit, so there will be value in having it enter closer to destination. So it is a time versus price trade-off.
Yep.
Yeah, just an interesting data point, and again, it's an extreme one, but if you're doing carrier route, no drop ship, going to zone 1 or 2, the pound rate increased 59%.
The other thing you notice on that slide, we are doing, you'll hear about it tomorrow, but we are doing bound per matter co-mail now, as of the last month or so. But we didn't have enough data points to really do any kind of analysis here. And we will get that out as soon as we have more basically data that we can actually monitor and model. We should add that though, the dropship analysis of does it make sense to actually move it closer. It's not really drop ship, but move it to a closer zone. Take it to save the time. Yep. Something we got to look at. Okay. So when you look at it overall, it does align, but don't use the 6.5 as a budgetary number. The idea here is we tried to run enough analysis that'll give you, depending on what category you fall into, a really good budgetary number. And then as well, we'll talk about next steps. There's things that we can do to even refine this a little bit more for you in terms of what to expect. But high level, these numbers are really pretty good right now in terms of that average and what to expect out there coming up in this rate case. Questions before we move on to some of the drop shipping and some of the other?
Over here.
Just a quick question. So on, sorry. Hello. So just on some of the commercial and nonprofit flats, obviously you guys talked about the 5-digit get hit hard on NDC and SCF. So why are those rate increases bigger than something that's not sorted as well as 5 and 3-digit?
Do we want to audible that to Sharon?
Yes, I was multitasking. Can I rehear the question?
Just why are the rate increases higher for, say, 5-digit SCF and NDC than, say, 3-digit in the less well-sorted rate cells?
Is the actual price higher or the percent
No, the
increase
percentage.
higher?
The percentages.
So the same amount on a lower number is going to be a higher percentage. I would have to see if the absolute amount to keep the rate relationships, if we added 2 cents to both a 3-digit and a 5-digit, the percent increase on a 5-digit would be higher. So I would have to go back and look in terms of absolute numbers, or if we had been over discounting something, and I don't think that was the case, but if something changed in the amount of the cost avoidance, we would have to raise 5-digit to correct a discount.
Got it.
And I guess the other thing I would add to the answer is, to some extent, it does depend on, too, the amount of volume in that rate category. And, once you get into, for example, 3-digit and mixed, the volumes are, I would say, far less. And so there just isn't a lot of revenue associated with applying the price there. And as Sharon has noted, the Postal Service looks at where are the products increasing in volume, and those are where they would like to use their price authority.
Yes, true.
So.
Lots of numbers. It all makes sense now? Or you'll come up and ask after, which is fine. Now we're going to talk a little bit about dropship. Obviously, it had a bigger impact this time around.
Yeah, and I would say, the one area of this price change that is, a good news story is, as Sharon noted earlier, they have finally corrected the imbalance for drop shipping, and now have increased the signal for drop shipping and the incentive for drop shipping. And so one of the things, so this is the one for periodicals, you'll see overall a 16% gain. I know Sharon was, we had the conversation, our team had a conversation with Sharon and saying, hey, did you realize, the incentive to drop ship a periodical when you're looking at sheer just transportation versus a catalog over in marketing mail, the incentive to drop ship marketing mail was dramatically larger than it was for periodicals. And so that was one of the findings we had out of the last price change. Talked with Sharon's team about it, and as you can see, they came up with a way to help make that incentive larger for periodicals. And again, marketing mail, again, it's a similar story. We're seeing nice jumps in improvement around drop shipping. Obviously, we're going to be talking later today about, all the logistics and challenges there, and the fact that costs are going up. But on the same hand, the Postal Service's costs are going up. The thing to keep in mind, though, too, is the Postal Service costs are a year in the rears. So, like the costs that we are experiencing now, the incentives that we will see won't be until next year. So we're a little bit behind, but still, it's, in my opinion, a good signal to see that we're seeing improvements around drop shipping. And then the last thing, when we're talking about brown printed matter, obviously the parcel one, the negative 41% jumps out. Again, that is the result of unzoning. And so that is really just the average of looking at the different rate cells and what the change was and what was the net result of that. So it is something that if you are clearly doing bound printed matter parcels, we need to be having discussions about what does these changes and this price change mean, and we need to start planning for July.
The good news is most of our bound printed matter parcels, or a good percentage now, is going DDU, which is actually at least on the good end of this thing. So we're working with that. And that's the reason we're doing some of the co-mail stuff, because again, it's how do you get just what they're asking for. How do you get a bigger pallet so that it's more effective for them? So, okay, the next part, and any questions before we get into some more details on what this impact is looking like over the last 18 months and next steps? Okay. One of the things that we were asked to do is kind of a perspective and thoughts on what's happened in the last, in essence, 3 rate cases the last 18 months. So what we did is actually put together a very similar slide. It's very busy, but it's the same numbers you've seen us in our webinars in January of 21, webinars last August. The gray line there you will see is actually the USPS taken in terms of what the overall was, and then you'll see in the white areas what we're looking at on our averages. Now, the other thing that this may look different than a lot of slides I've seen out in the industry is because it actually is naturally compounding, you can't just add those up. We actually used it as a compounding factor by the time we got to July, right? Because it went up in January, then that percentage went up on top of it, and then it went up again. So again, first class is a little tough because we don't have a lot of data points there. So the 14 or the 15.81 of the Postal Service, and then we're seeing letters at say 20 and then 32% for the flats. That's just because we have a limited data set. But it is, I guess, eye-opening when you look at the marketing mail overall, and you start looking at 16%, 14 on the letter side, and then we're seeing 20 to 28% increases on the catalog. That's the thing that we're going to talk about this afternoon and tomorrow in terms of solutioning. How do we, I can tell you right now, we don't have an answer to offset 28% of the postage, but how can we help offset some of those pieces? Because that's more than the last, in most cases, 7-8 years combined, we've just hit in the last 18 months. And obviously, from what we heard this morning and last night, it looks like there's going to be more to come. So this was just a perspective of what we've really looked at because people wanted to understand the overall impact there. So again, letters not too bad in terms of very close to that overall 15, but when you add the non-compensatory, especially on the product level where you're going to get that extra 2%, you can see the marketing mail flats, i.e. the catalogs, both piece and pound in that 20 to 22, and then the nonprofits in that 25 to 28 over this period.
And I know there was some conversation going on during the break, and the thing to keep in mind too is, so like, for example, periodicals is an underwater product class as a whole, so that 2% authority is only a once a year thing. Where we get into marketing mail flats, that is a underwater product within a compliant class. So every time the Postal Service changes the price, that gets hit with the extra 2%. So that's where you're seeing like the marketing mail flats, upper 20s, where periodicals are still down in the upper teens. But that's because they only get hit once with that 2% once a year versus every single price change once we get into this twice a year. And you're seeing essentially that compounding factor really start to take effect.
Yeah, because basically you're getting 4% a year until it comes out of non-compensatory. So the 2-year increases also kind of double down on this piece of it, that extra compensatory. Yeah. Actually, it's a good point, and we can do that. Yes, this is 3541s, 3602s, right? This is literally the postage, but you're absolutely right. The postage is offset by the drop ship, so we should really add the freight component in there to see what total. But Kelly will talk about freight this afternoon, but with freight going up, I'm sure those percentages aren't. It's going to be worse. Yeah. Yeah. And this wasn't to bring people down. This is just that reality check of. Yeah. We succeeded on bringing people down. But trust me, we will get into how can we save you 4% here? How can we save you 3%? There are things that we can still do, promotions and so forth that we'll talk about. But realistically, we have to look at what is it that we're facing. So you've got to know, okay, how are we going to address this? How are we going to solution? And some of the things the Postal Service is doing with trying to bring it into more dimension-based, shape-based product versus having these separate categories, hopefully will help make them more efficient, and obviously we can produce it that way. But we have to try to offset this right now. And the boss just said we're making everybody down, so we'll try to get to something a little better. Actually, overall, the bound per matter, the flats obviously didn't take as much because they didn't have that hit in that January.
Yep.
So the compounding factor didn't take as much into it overall, but you can kind of see what we're dealing with. I'm sure if you don't know the numbers, I'm sure you're feeling it on your financials when these things happen. But you've got to know what we're going after to know how we're going to offset some of it and what we have to deal with. So I feel like Sharon up here getting yelled at now, but it is just the reality of what we're dealing with. And we do have some ideas because we have agreed to, we've met enough times with Sharon's group on what price they do directly drives what we do with preparation, what we do with drop ship, and what we do with co-mail. So the two things are going hand in hand now. So there's also things, obviously they're giving us a hint. They don't want the 3- and 5-digit and mixed ADC stuff. They don't want the small pallets going to the NDCs, those types of things. So that gives us opportunity, again, to make things more efficient and actually partner. So hopefully, as long as we keep the rates going in the right direction on that, or incentives. Aren't you glad you stayed through lunch?
I am.
Okay, enough on the 18-month impact. Again, it gives you a look forward now to 2023. I tried to get Sharon's opinion on this before we put our opinion out there, but go ahead. You can take this one.
All right, so, one of the things that the PMG even noted at MTAC when talking about 2023 is that, obviously depending on inflation, potentially skipping the January 2023 price change is not completely off the table. However, I think my concern is if inflation keeps doing what it's doing, inflation is hitting the Postal Service as well. Like Sharon was saying, it's likely going to be looking like 3% over 6 months. That's a big enough bogey that I suspect that the Postal Service will probably be filing a market-dominant price change. At the same time, that puts promotions on the table. We're going to have to take a good hard look at that and what kind of opportunities that's going to bring to the table. The thing to keep in mind is January will be CPI only, but again, the way CPI has been jumping, that still could be a fairly decent number. And then I would say it's going to be really hard to predict, at least at this point in time, what a July of next year might look like. I mean, I would say from Quad's perspective, volume looks like it should be staying strong. Hopefully we see that across the industry as a whole, which would help keep that density adder small. You know, the retirement adder, I don't think, Sharon, that's going to fluctuate a whole lot year to year. So, you know, it was what, 0.78% or something like that. Am I remembering right? 0.5.
75 on retirement.
785. You know, so it's going to be somewhere in that neighborhood. And then, you know, obviously the big question is what's going to happen with inflation and CPI going forward. So, you know, I think that it really requires a crystal ball. And so, you know, as it was noted earlier, it makes it really hard when you're going to get to fourth quarter this year and say, okay, what do we need to budget? We're going to have to, you know, as we get closer to that, really take a good look at, you know, what is CPI doing? How is volume staying? You know, one of the things that I know we and a number of others in industry association leadership that we'll be talking later today, the Postal Service does have a weekly call. They talk about the flash volumes, and, you know, so far, you know, they've been holding strong, which is, you know, to me, a good sign. And so if that stays up, I think our density adder will stay, like Sharon noted, relatively small. We know the Postal Service is always going to be adding around 1 million new addresses, so that part of the equation is always going to continue to go up.
So the bottom line is between you and her, I'm hearing that we're going to have a January increase most likely, and it's going to be that CPI plus the 2% for the product.
That's what I'd put money on.
And the nonverbals, which was you smiling this whole time going, I'm not picking. Inflation's going to push us there. I mean, you were nice to say 1.5%. We were assuming about 2% is that tipping point. But the bottom line, if you add that plus the way inflation's going, unfortunately, it looks like we're going to see something in January. Hopefully, we'll have those promotions before that, though, so that we know how to build into it, right? Think we've hit that enough times? Okay.
Oh, red pen, yes.
I think you said it, Jeff. In January, it will be CPI, but if you're marketing mail flat, so you'll get that extra 2%, correct?
The non-compensatory, they have that, yes.
If
The
they
product level.
if they choose not to do one in January, does the 2% not apply either?
In July,
Right, but in January, if they say we're not doing CPI, they won't do anything, correct? Yep, okay.
So Sharon, would it ever be on the table for the Postal Service to just do a filing that is promotions only?
So yes, we looked into that. If we don't do a January increase, how do we do promotions? And is that a CPI case? We're working through our lawyers about, is that going to trigger 2% on flats if we do promotions? And we would hope not, we would think not, but that's something that we're working through. How do we do promotions without triggering a 2% on flats?
Okay. Other questions? A lot of this slide is crystal ball, so.
Mark? On the next slide. You're a good setup, man. Okay. You got the same haircut, though. He's a good lead-in man here. because that's what we're going to talk about. Okay, so how do we, besides look at all these numbers and look at the downside of it, how do we take advantage of these things? First thing is we do have calculators out now. You'll be getting a message tomorrow, hopefully, tomorrow or Friday, where we can actually run your mailing through the calculator. So if you want to just verify that it fits into the budgetary numbers, we obviously can run your data that way. The other thing is, and Mark already was leading into this, which is, no, this is great. We co-mail about 40% of everything we do. So there's still a lot of opportunity, but we have gotten to that point where we're going to have to, partner together and make changes, whether it's a subtle trim size or whether it's an insiding. You're going to hear about it this afternoon. Making changes to standardize things so that it helps put these together is really the way to make sure that we get to those levels all the time. If you would have asked me this time last year, we were in COVID, but 2 years ago, would we ever do bound printed matter co-mail? And I said, no, we're doing it now. There's things that we can do out there to help with this, but we do need your help too, because I'd love to tell you we've got this great solution that's going to save 20% all in one shot. We don't. But we do have solutions that can save you 5% over here or save you, 4% on this. So part of your file can get upgraded. And we'll talk about those. That's kind of the pitch for tomorrow's sessions. You'll hear about it this afternoon. If you're not taking advantage of that promotional discount, whether it's the TSI discount we've got out there now, we're going to obviously have solutions for you for informed delivery. That's money left on the table. So we have a session this afternoon on that, and then tomorrow we're going to get into co-mail, commingling, shared mail, all kinds of different options you have. But to your point, Mark, we have to think about it differently sometimes, because we still have a portion of this mail that isn't really optimized and we're sending out. Now, we'll also hit it this afternoon. I understand that the delivery and the supply chain challenges have an effect on this, right? If the paper isn't in on time, then we can't necessarily co-mail if we want to try to get it out. We'll talk about that this afternoon too, in that session. But there is still a lot of room to be had in terms of optimizing this. So we'll talk about those in the session, like I say, today and tomorrow. But again, the tech center is open. We've got people there from paper. We've got them from the optimization team. Brian and his team is out here. We're here to help you, but we really have to work together on this stuff because it is going to make some changes to how we're doing things and how you're doing things. And it's not major changes, but I think we're hitting the point, and that was really the idea of that one slide, is we all need to change a little bit to make things efficient and also to make things move forward. Because if we keep doing the same thing, those kind of rates aren't going to be the sustainable way to do it. So questions? Absolutely.
Back to the okay, hello? Can you hear me? Okay, there it is. If you go back to the throw-up slide of the, those big percentages, that's what I'm going to call it from now on.
I'll change it from now on.
I think in this conference we have a lot of stuff that we're talking about to help incrementally offset that. But one thing we're probably not going to hit that much in this conference, but one thing you should be aware of is we also have a lot of visibility to effectiveness of marketing spend. And so the real way to tackle this is to increase the responsiveness. I don't mean just print. I mean print plus digital plus every media channel you're in. That's part of why Quad's invested in this ability to go all the way upstream into content creation, but also content execution. Like we bought Rise Interactive on the digital performance side because we saw an opportunity to kind of work with people on the total spend, but not just from a cost standpoint. It's from an effectiveness standpoint. So when you look at these scary numbers, why don't you calculate what improvement on responsiveness per dollar of marketing spend across all media channels does your organization really have to do to offset this? It's not as much as you think. Okay, so, I know a lot of people here play in different areas in your companies, but there's also your whole marketing side, people who might not be here. And we're trying to tackle that account by account to really expose people to what we're assembling here. And if you look at what the marketing side is, the challenges they have, and the reason Quad's doing what we're doing, is it's a very fragmented approach in trying to get help to create more responsiveness of your total marketing spend. So we're trying to bring as much as we can in line under roof, combined with print, but all the way up through radio, digital, TV, whatever. And heavy analytics, by the way, we're spending a lot of money on analytics so that we can create that one view of responsiveness of marketing spend. Because right now, I'm telling you, this is going to keep going, we know that, but this is offsettable. I can tell you, it's amazing, we do business with some of the biggest marketers in the world, and it's still surprising to me how much is left on the table in responsiveness. Okay, so that's my little soapbox here that, you know, kind of listening to this and being depressed about this, the throw-up slide, is there is a lot of opportunity on the other side of the equation here.
Oh, it's a great point. It's still that return on what it is that we're putting out there. And it's between that and then the physical production efficiencies. Again, we can offset a lot of this. It's the part is we're going to have to do things a little different, right? Whether it's standardizing, you know, in terms of coming up with ways to actually put this stuff together to get them their bigger full pallet and to get those rates down and get them more stabilized. And like I say, 40% is great, but it's like, okay, how come we're not doing 50 or 60%? You know, and it's not because this mail is already qualified at that carrier out or high density level. It's we're going to have to make minor tweaks to get it there.
And one thing to call out too, as we were going through this, is, you know, the Postal Service introduced 2 new rates to incentivize, you know, high density plus and saturation on, you know, carrier out pallets, and that doesn't exist today. So when you're doing an analysis, you really can't come up with what that number is. So that's a greenfield opportunity to look at and say, how much mail can we move into that category to then help offset some of what we're seeing in the analysis that we're doing right now.
And that goes back to the marketing approach of how do we add additional prospecting to get them to those levels that are out there and take advantage of that and those additional pieces. So, any other questions, concerns, thoughts? You really did quiet the room down. I wowed them all right. I don't think the right way. Next up was, well, it's us between us and lunch now, so now we get to lunch. Lunch is going to be at 11:45. It's going to be down in the Stella restaurant. It'll be 11:40, anything after 11:45 or after you can go in. We'll work through that. The tech center will be open. We'll be around, obviously, for questions during that period as well. And then we're going to regroup back in here around 1 o'clock is for the next session. So feel free to get a hold of us. Stella's right down the hall, past the reception or lobby area. So should be easy to find. And they should be, I want to say 11:45, so about 15 minutes, they should be ready in there. Thank you.